Chapter 1. Eagle Flight, over the Eastern Pacific. I, Satan Mekretrig, Lord of Hell, Commander of the Legions of the Damned, do hereby declare my dominion over the earth and all that it contains. Crawl to me, humans, knowing the eternity of torment that awaits you. Balls, said Lieutenant Michael Wong. The voice that had come over the radio link, booming in the cockpit of his F-A-18E, had distracted him from paying proper attention to the cockpit display of his APG-79 radar. The new AESA radar was a vast improvement over the older APG-73, but that was, as always, a slight problem all of its own. Until the pilots learned how to take full advantage of the improved data flow, they could be swamped with it. Wong was experiencing that problem now. The resolution of the new radar was phenomenal, but it seemed to indicate that the wings on the targets 60 nautical miles out in front of him were flapping. Full of himself, isn't he? Or should it be it? Lieutenant Anthony Squires was genuinely interested. He was renowned as being the Ronald Reagan Air Group's grammar geek. Try it that. Wong wasn't really interested. The targets in front of him were behaving oddly. They were slow, 180 miles per hour at most. They had a strong radar image yet seemed to have no infrared signature. That was an odd combination, to put it mildly. The bombastic message that had interrupted his concentration was irritating, no more than that. So what were those contacts in front of him? Birds. They were too fast for that, surely. The peregrine falcon was the fastest bird known, and that could just hit 180 mph in a steep dive. These were doing that in level flight. So they had to be some form of aircraft. That was assuming the AESA radar wasn't generating a completely false image, of course. And who knew how the electronic systems were malfunctioning following the delivery of the message 3 days ago? There was one way to find out. Buster, this is Eagle Flight, 200 miles out, bearing 353. We have an anomalous radar contact some 60 miles out in front of us. Please confirm. There was a pause for a few seconds. Electrostatic discharges in the atmosphere were playing havoc with radio communications, but the system's filtering programs quickly cleared the white noise from the channel. Confirm contact, Eagle Flight. Bearing 358, range from Buster is 66.6 nautical miles. Target speed 184 knots, course 135er. For your information, Crown and Scepter are tracking also. They have locks. There was a pause, a series of crackles on the radio, then the message resumed. If targets are hostile, you are cleared to engage. Wong translated the message in his head. Buster was CVN-76 USS Ronald Reagan, Crown was CG-70 USS Lake Erie, an Aegis cruiser, while Scepter was DDG-93 USS Changhoon, one of the Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers that now dominated the fleet's surface combatant force. Also Aegis-equipped, that meant whatever the targets were, they were now being tracked by 3 of the most advanced radar systems in the USA Navy. The lock part of the message was really interesting, that suggested the order to open fire was already being passed out. That didn't surprise Wong. Human reaction to the message had split neatly down religious lines. Those whose religion had demanded blind submission to the will of God had accepted it without a struggle and more or less laid down and died. They just weren't around anymore. The rest of the world's population had followed the example set by Britain's Prime Minister Gordon Brown. His reply to the message had been, "Sod off, Baldric," followed by a reassuring message to the British people that he had a cunning plan to deal with the situation. The British had enjoyed the joke, whatever it was, and collectively told Satan to perform some highly improbable obscenities on himself. They'd been the first only by a matter of minutes, as most of the other countries in the world has replied with similar messages. Ever since then, the message had been repeated at regular intervals, almost as if the concept of human defiance was so completely unexpected that the powers up there couldn't comprehend its existence. Well, if that was the case, the powers up there didn't know the human race very well. The 3 days since the first reception of the message had been something of a standoff. Humans had waited for the next development, allowing the situation to mature in military parlance, while the only response to their defiance had been the repeated proclamations. No effort to force compliance, not yet at any rate. And no overt human resistance. Wong got the feeling that was all about to change. All members, Eagle Flight, increase to 5 or 60 knots, say again increase to 5 or 60 knots. Intercept targets in front, range, 58 nautical miles. Weapons are free, say again, weapons are free. Good hunting, Eagle Flight. The 4F A-18S accelerated out of cruise speed, building up to maximum subsonic. The E model had more range and fuel than the older As and Cs, but fuel status was always a serious concern to Hornet drivers. Wong had listened with envy to those who had flown the now gone Tomcats or even longer lost intruders. Then, he glanced down at his radar scope again. There were 4 targets, apparently blissfully ignorant of the Super Hornets bearing down on them. That was neat, 1 each. Eagle Flight, we are swinging around behind them. I have radar paints on all 4, no infrared signature yet. Each Eagle aircraft, take target corresponding to your flight position, from the left. Use aim 120 then close in for 20 Mike. Not sure aim 9 will work unless we can get a heat signature off whatever is out there. We'll get a visual ID first. At 12 nautical miles range, the USA Navy Hornets got their visual ID. The contacts were 4 giant creatures, jet black in color, looking like a hideous cross between a gorilla and a bird. 4 limbs, 2 wings, flying in an unconcerned, oblivious line. Just what the hell are those? Wong wasn't sure which pilot had breathed the comment into the radio. Didn't matter, they all knew what to do. So did he come to that? Buster, this is Eagle. Targets visually identified, large flying humanoids about the same size as a superbug. Wingspan at least twice as great as ours, probably much larger. Engaging. Eagle, this is Buster. Acknowledged. Targets designated as demons. Good luck, Eagle Flight. A few days earlier, the fighter controller might have added, and may God go with you, but not after the message and the betrayal it had represented. Wong switched the annunciator on his AIM 120s on. They were growling gently, a sustained continuous note that indicated their homing heads were logged onto his selected target, the demon second from the left. The F-A-18s were closing fast, the range was dropping to the point where the hits would be almost instantaneous. Eagle Flight, open fire. Wong's pressure on the firing button was almost simultaneous with his order. A pair of AIM 120 missiles streaked ahead of his aircraft, curving after the demon he had picked out for his target. He'd been right, the gap was so short that the target couldn't have evaded even if it had wanted to. It never even tried. Demon Shingrolith was actually aware of the approaching fighters, he'd seen them when they were still 15 miles out, far beyond the range of any human eye, so he had assumed their presence was coincidental. He had other problems to worry about, a few inconsequential humans were of no significant account one way or the other. What concerned him was the way his skin was itching, it had started a few minutes before and was getting steadily worse. Maddening. He hadn't even worried when the 4 human machines had swung in behind his group and started to close the range on them. That had been when his skin itch had become really intolerable. Then, the humans had done something really strange, odd streaks of smoke coming out from under their flying machines. Surely they couldn't be resisting the all-powerful armies of the damned. The AIM 120s worked as advertised. They were good missiles, well-designed, well-tested, and they had a target that was proving cooperative to the point of suicide. No maneuvering, no electronic warfare, no interference. If the guidance had been capable of human thought, it would have been vaguely offended at being asked to solve a task so undemanding. The first missile exploded between Shingrolith's legs, just underneath his tail. The 50-pound explosive warhead was wrapped with heavy-gauge pre-notched wire that disintegrated into an annular hail of pre-formed fragments when the missile's proximity fuse set off the explosive charge. Some of those razor-sharp fragments slashed through Shingrolith's tail, severing it at the root and sending it spinning off in a long arc. Others ripped into his legs and genitals, tearing open the great arteries, sending his fire and acid blood spraying over his body, and mangling his reproductive organs beyond recognition. Shingrolith's scream of demented agony was heard even in the sound-insulated cockpits of the F-A-18s. The second missile did really serious damage. Its proximity fuse initiated it right underneath Shingrolith's belly. The holocaust of tungsten steel fragments ripped open his stomach and tore his abdominal cavity to shreds. Even in a mind crazed by the ghastly pain from the first hit, Shingrolith noticed the sudden drop in weight as his intestines dropped out of his body. Then his fire and acid blood, spraying from more wounds than could reasonably be counted, set fire to his flesh. Shingrolith tumbled downwards, all hope of control had gone when he had lost his stabilizing tail. By the time his remains hit sea level, all that was left of him was a fine carbon dust. Immediately on firing, Wong had firewalled his throttles, cut in reheat and taken his F-A-18 up into a steep climb. The last thing he had wanted to do was get too close to those things. As he rolled over at the top of the climb, he could see the havoc his attack had wrought on the demon formation below. His target had gone, its death marked by a black streak towards the sea far below. Another one of the formation had taken hits from 4 AIM 120s, for some reason 2 F-A-18s had fired on the same aircraft. Well, that sort of thing happened. It had meant that the demon had been quite literally torn apart by the storm of fragments and blast of the explosions. More than 200 pounds of best explosive American dollars could buy had vented its wrath on the hideous creature, and all that was left of it was a shower of burning fragments. A third demon was staggering away. It had been the last to get hit and had escaped the eviscerating body hits. Instead, one of its wings had been torn to tiny fragments and it was going down in a helpless spin. Even as Wong watched, two of his F-18s were closing on it. Prygrathrath was desperately trying to control his descent. One of his wings had gone, it was just a mass of torn flesh and spurting blood. The only thing that was saving him was that his flight path was keeping the blood and acid away from his body. The fate of Shingrolith and Karen Askados had shown him what would happen when demon blood and body parts mixed. Two of the gray-painted human machines were coming after him. He could see them, but with his crippled wings there was little he could do about it. It was odd, there was a strange twinkling light coming from the front of the two flying machines. Then Prygrathrath's lights went out. Squires had fired a much longer burst than was normal for the M61 cannon in the nose of his F-A-18. He and his wingman had aimed very carefully, using the plane's onboard computer and continuously computed impact point sights to place all 100 rounds of their bursts square into the demon's face. The effect was more than either pilot could have hoped. The great, hideously malformed head had just disintegrated as the armor-piercing incendiary shells ripped through the skin and shattered the bones underneath. The demon's eyes, in fact every feature of its face, had been destroyed in the hail of cannon shells tearing through its structure. Once again, fire and acid blood spraying from the ruptured veins and arteries finished the job of destruction that fragments, explosions and blast had started. The demon erupted into flames and dropped like a stone towards the sea below. That had left one demon, untouched, unharmed by the sudden, vicious attack. Quellerastus simply couldn't believe that the humans had dared to attack him and his colleagues, let alone that they had killed 3 of his flight mates with such contemptuous ease. Filled with unrighteous wrath at the effrontery of the attack, he swerved to retaliate at the pair of human flying machines that were coming straight at him. Now, they would learn what the wrath of a demon meant. He opened his mouth and gave a blast of terrifying hellfire straight at them. In Eagle 1, Wong saw the fireball leave the demon's mouth and flip the ailerons over, pulling the stick back in a barrel roll around the jet of flame. It wasn't precisely a hard maneuver. The demon may have had powerful lungs, but they could only drive a jet of flame so fast. Compared with the problems posed by trying to dodge a multi-Mach missile, the flame was easy to avoid. Even better, the jet of fire was a perfect infrared source for his AIM-9 sidewinders. Both annunciators were screaming with the demand to be let loose, and Wong obliged them both. They streaked from his wingtip mounts, heading straight for the inferno of heat that was the fire-breathing demon's mouth. Quellerastus did the worst thing he could possibly do under the circumstances. He gulped in shock as the 2 missiles hurtled into his mouth. Once again, proximity fuses worked to perfection. Preformed fragments slashed out, ripping through the slate-black flesh of the demon. Some went up into his brain, bouncing around inside his skull until all that laid within was reduced to a finely ground slush. Others sawed down through the demon's chest, carving into his heart and lungs. More fragments, from the missile Quellerastus had accidentally swallowed, tore the demon's neck apart, severing his spinal column and paralyzing him. That was a mercy for Quellerastus. It meant that he did feel it when his blood set his flesh on fire and he vanished within a ball of fire. Buster, this is Eagle. All 4 demons engaged and destroyed. And form all Buster elements, they blow up and burn if you hit them hard enough. We're on our way back, we're hitting bingo fuel out here. Eagle Flight, this is Buster. Come on home, the party is just starting down here. Wong relaxed in his seat. His Eagle 1 had 2 confirmed kills, Eagle 3 and Eagle 4 had 1 each. Not ace status yet, but a good start. National Command Post, Washington, D.C. Mr. President, a message from the Ronald Reagan Battle Group out in the Pacific. They've engaged 4 flying demons, killed all of them. No casualties on our side. Whatever these things are, they aren't immortal or invulnerable. They burn and die, just like we do. President Bush looked dully at Secretary Gates. The betrayal that had been represented by the message had hit him deep, torn apart the faith that had kept him going even in the darkest years of his presidency. Then, with his opinion poll figures trending up at last, this had to happen. He shook his head, tried to clear the clouds of despair from his mind and absorbed the information. As he did so, his eyes lit up for the first time in 3 days. Get word out to all our armed forces. Tell them to engage these things, at every opportunity. Shoot first, hit hard and keep hitting them. Let them know that we may go down, but it won't be without one hell of a fight. Them, sir. Them. Everybody. Our forces, the religious leaders who brought that message to us, those who the message came from. I don't care who they are, either they attacked us or they betrayed us, and I don't see the difference between those who promise us an eternity of torture or those who would hand us over to that fate. They're both our enemies now. And we'll fight them. All of them. Bush's voice had gained strength and he made his commitment. We may have believed in higher powers once, but they've forfeited any loyalty we may have owed them. Secretary Gates, get the word out. We fight. Sir, I have to warn you, this may well be committing a war crime. We haven't had United Nations approval for any action, and without a vote in the UN, we are committing an act of aggressive war, which is a war crime. I therefore rule that we must hold off any action until there had been a full meeting of the Security Council. I will also issue orders for the pilots involved in this incident to be arrested and brought up on war crimes charges. There was a rumble of discontent around the war room. Bush heard it and that made up his mind. He looked at the JAG officer with contempt. Place this man under arrest. Remove him, get rid of him. From now on, the United States will act in its own best interests and defend itself as best it can. Any other nations who want to join in this struggle are welcome to do so. There might be quite a few of those, Mr. President. Secretary Rice was carrying a mass of message flimsies. We're getting messages from other countries right now. First one is from Mr. George Yong Boon Yo, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Singapore. Apparently a demon landed there, carrying a demand for Singapore's submission. What did he do? Nothing, sir. The demon's demand was wrapped up in some sort of parchment and he dropped it on landing. Littering is a serious offense in Singapore, sir, and the Singapore police riddled the demon with bullets and then beat it to death. Anyway, Mr. Yo says that Singapore's going to fight and they'd appreciate our help. He's got it. Who else? Another one landed in Bangkok, Thailand. That one didn't get very far either. It wouldn't bribe the police at a checkpoint to let it through and then got stuck in the Bangkok traffic jams. The army blew it away. With tanks. Apparently, local street traders are selling bits of demon to the tourists. Anyway, same message from the Thais, they're going to fight and they'd appreciate any help we can send, only they're adding if we need any aid, we only have to ask. Nice of them. Well, people, it looks like the war has started. Let's try to do a better job this time round, right?